Thanks very much, Admiral, and thank you to you and to George for giving me the opportunity to participate in this. This is an amazing forum with extraordinary insight and experience and analysis available, and I'm learning a ton just in the process and expect to learn a ton in the course of this panel because I have the opportunity to sit alongside a number of folks with extensive experience and perspective. You know, one of the things I learned in my time at War on the Rocks was to ask panelists to introduce themselves. I think in the course of doing that, you learn a little bit about what it is that they feel about their experience and perspective that best informs why they are sitting here. It also avoids the chance of leaving out something that they consider important. But I would just mention one thing, that for a panel on the fleet, we are exceptionally well positioned because we have extensive fleet experience with Admiral Trinque, with Dr. Sand, who spent about 9 years as a surface warfare officer, nuclear trained, and has brought that experience to his work in the Center for Naval Warfare Studies, and Mr. Hogg with extensive experience as close to surface warfare as you can get as an aviator, as a LAMP CO, and extensive time, obviously, in the programmatics of how it is that we procure and build our fleet. So I'm excited by the opportunity to learn from your experience. The one thing I will offer before we begin for myself and for Dr. Sand is that the positions that we offer here are our own positions offered in a personal capacity, do not represent the positions of the United States Naval War College, the United States Navy, or the Department of War. I'll leave to Admiral Trinque and to Mr. Hogg whatever disclaimers they feel are appropriate there, but it is useful to do that. So with that, I'll ask each of our panelists just to take 2 or 3 minutes to talk a little bit about who you are and what your perspective is on the problem of the fleet. And then we'll move into some moderated questions and then Q&A from the audience, where I'm sure that there's almost no questions about fleet design and what it is that we are facing. So, Derek, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thanks, Doyle. And it's great to be up here with this great group of people. And so Doyle and I are Naval Academy classmates. I'm excited to see him continuing in a leadership role in the education of our professional force. Mr. Hogg epitomizes the professionalism of our civilian government servants, and I really appreciate your time and you being here, and Dr. Sand also representing academia and the professionalism of the education of our force. My name is Derek Trinque. I'm a surface warfare officer. I joined the Navy because I wanted to command a ship. I got to my first ship, USS Philippine Sea, in early 1993. Found out that being on a ship was different than I thought it was going to be, and yet I still loved it. And so I continued on with my desire to command a ship. The Navy allowed me to do that 3 times, as an 04, an 05, and an 06. And at some point I had to figure out what else I wanted to do in the Navy, because you just can't command every single minute of your career. That would be exhausting, if rewarding. What I decided was I wanted to do something that needed to be done. And if the Navy would give me a job that needed to be done, then I would be happy. And every single job that I've had in the Navy has been one of those jobs. And so now I'm privileged, very, very privileged, to be the Director of Surface Warfare on the CNO staff. And so I am the lead for requirements for the surface force. And among the things that go into that job are parts of fleet design. I am by no means the only person interested in fleet design. I get a lot of help on that. I am by no means the only person who's interested in what sort of capabilities go into our ships. I get a lot of help on that too. But the convocation of ideas that my team gets to collate and then bring to me so that I can bring up to the N8 and N9 leadership, and then through them to CNO and through him to the secretary, and then on, it is absolutely a privilege to be able to lead those people. And so I am excited to have almost 6 months in the job as N96, and I'll be ready for your questions. Thanks.
Erik?
Good morning. It's really an honor to be on this panel and to speak to all of you as the audience. I've been involved with and thinking about Navy questions in the Navy for just over 20 years, which really makes me the novice in this room. As Doyle mentioned, I have a background as a surface warfare officer, and then took that to the study of strategy and security issues at MIT before coming to the Naval War College. I think the main reason that I'm here today is for the last 3 years, I've been intimately involved with leading the Center for Naval Warfare Studies efforts to support the Navy staff regarding the future fleet, particularly leading that in 2024 and again this year. And that gives me a little bit longer time horizon picture as we're trying to think about what the fleet might need to look like 20 years in the future, which obviously there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty that you have to deal with on that time horizon. But I'll try and add a a little bit of that longer horizon analytics perspective to our discussions today.
Thanks, Mr. Hogg.
Good morning. For 28 of the last 30 years, I've been involved in the PPBE process in the Pentagon. And in dog years, that's cruel and unusual punishment. But I still bring that perspective from the fleet and my time there. But one sea story to start things off. The night before we took I-Day at the Naval Academy, Jamie probably doesn't remember this. We were staying, all families were cuddled around at the Holiday Inn and other places in Annapolis, and so my dad comes in the door for doing something, and he says, "Hey, the guy next door, I think he's running for class president." The guy next door was Jamie Fogo. So first impressions don't change much over time. So look forward to the conversation.
Thanks very much. Well, Admiral Caudle has set our conversation up well today by releasing a couple of days ago his third C note on fleet, which is in fact our topic. And the C note, as expected, focused on the pillars of platforms, payloads, and people. And it also focused very heavily, as Admiral Kilby discussed, on the idea of a hedge fleet. And so I'd like to focus first on the platforms pillar of that. And in the context of hedging, we have a particular challenge in balancing current readiness. The Davidson window has already been brought up in our forum today, and the need to have highly capable platforms on station in numbers in order to be able to respond to and deter threats in that theater, at the same time that we are investing in future capabilities at a time when technology is advancing rapidly in ways that have significant implications for the shape of the future force. And so, Derek, I'd like to begin with you to discuss your perspective on meeting those things and how you incorporate the concept of the hedge fleet in doing that, looking specifically at platforms.
Yeah, thanks very much. So we need a balanced fleet, and so we have a large number of very, very capable large surface combatants epitomized by the Early class destroyers. Our partners in acquisitions and in industry are working very hard to make it easier and simpler to upgrade the combat systems in those destroyers. And so you'll hear talk of the integrated combat system and the containerization of the code and the ways that we will make it easier for us to upgrade the ships without making large holes in the hull to rip out equipment and put in new equipment. And those are exceptional efforts to take our most capable platforms and continue to add capability to them. Those platforms are necessarily very expensive because we have put a lot of capability into them. And so as much as an all high-level fleet would sound attractive, it's not terribly practical and it is not the best use of the taxpayers' money. And so as one of the stewards up here, I have to make sure that we're delivering to type commanders and fleet commanders numbers that allow them to achieve all of their missions. And not all of their missions require service inside of the most challenging of the WEZs, the weapons engagement zones. We also have, and need more, small surface combatants. And so we have both the Freedom and Independence variant littoral combat ships, and we are working to upgrade those ships with more advanced combat systems, with offensive strike capability, with updated electronics and sensors and connectivity. Those are good investments because the use of those ships in both the 5th Fleet and the 7th Fleet AORs, I had littoral combat ships operationally under me when I commanded ESG-7 out of Okinawa. The capabilities of those ships are something I think we've overlooked for a long time. I need to deliver to our fleet commanders more small surface combatants so that our large surface combatants can focus on the jobs to which really only they are suited. And then to get specifically to the hedge force, we are working very hard. This is another one of those places where we're getting a lot of help and we're getting a lot of collaboration on unmanned surface vessels. And so the medium and small unmanned surface vessels will give our fleet commanders more capability and allow them to enact options that allow them to have a different acceptable level of risk for those platforms. And so I try to avoid using the word attritable, although in some cases we will view these platforms as attritable. But I want to give Admiral Paparo and Admiral Wyckoff and Admiral Thomas at Fleet Forces now, I want to give them options where they have a range of acceptable levels of risk for the platforms on the surface that they can use. And so medium unmanned surface vessels with containerized payloads allow us to do that. Small unmanned surface vessels allow them to do that. And the right investments to build the right kind of fleet with the right numbers allow us to give those fleet commanders the options they need.
Thanks. And if I can, I'd like to skip to Mr. Hogg first and then come back to you, Erik, because I think one of the perspectives that you bring is, when I talk of fleet, my experience tends to drive me to think of ships first. But of course, the fleet that we are designing and the fleet that we are operating is comprised of far more than ships and aircraft and submarines. It is a number of different systems bringing different capabilities. And I'm curious how you address the same question with the broad portfolio integration perspective that you have there.
So the competition of resourcing, between maintaining and sustaining the platforms that we have and we'll have for the Davidson window, is how they are going to be adaptable to be able to take in new systems and use them. And a good case in point on showing where that is successful is the USS Nimitz, 50 years old, commissioned in May of 1975 when Jamie and I were sophomores in high school, but it is as relevant today as it was when the final countdown was filmed on it. The tactics, the weapon systems have all adapted and evolved. You go to that vessel in 50 years has operated 30 different type model series aircraft. And each one is more relevant and more powerful. Gone from multiple sorties to take out a single aim point to now a single sortie to take out multiple aim points. But that's only because of that adaptability in that place where the resources, both weapons and people, quality of life, quality of service, the different points that Jim talked about, Vice Chief talked about this morning, is the other pieces that come into there. But that's that competition for the resources. So we have to do that balance. But as we've seen from Fifth Fleet operations, from the start of when Brad Cooper was out there with sail drones and other pieces, piecing that into those a part of the counter system. So it's relevant information to the commander to be able to make the right warfighting decisions.
Excellent. And Erik, I'm curious your perspective on this question, particularly from some of the research you've done with the CNO Futures Project and the Fleet Design 2045.
Yeah, so I think the first thing I want to echo is something that Admiral Kilby said this morning. And as we think about this trade-off between current readiness and future force, I think we need to avoid what in the 1950s was called hour of maximum danger thinking, right? That there's a window of time, and as long as we surge to be ready for that window of time, that we're going to be fine, right? Because the problem's not going to go away. This is a long-term competition with deterrence, and that makes the set of trade-offs harder. There is, I do think, though, a good news story as we look at the longer-term future fleet design that maybe makes some of these trade-offs less hard to make than they would have been in previous times. And that many of the newer systems and ideas that we're looking at, both now and into the future, are smaller, they're more modular, they're systems of systems. And that means that they can be introduced with less cost, and they can be potentially, and less need to find huge amounts in the budget to try and do that, at least to get started with the experimentation to figure out if they're gonna work. And I think that's sort of the point that I want to end on is as we do think about these trade-offs and fleet modernization, we need to realize that we're not going to get everything right the first time. And I have a colleague who just left the Naval War College who's done really good work on when are we at the greatest risk of doing innovation that's actually going to make things worse, right? And one of the things that he points out is that organizations that are stressed by reduced resources and increasing obligations, which sounds a little bit like the United States Navy today, sometimes they tend to do testing and evaluation. I don't mean that in the formal Department of War sense, right? But experimentation, learning about these systems. But sometimes they then ignore the results. And I think it's really important that we do that sort of testing and thinking, and we pay attention to those results, because some things are going to work and some things aren't, and we need to figure that out before the fight comes.
I think that's a really important point, and it's one that I'd like to drill down on a little bit more conceptually, because of course innovation involves risk. If you aren't failing frequently, you are likely not innovating. You may be evolving, you may be making developments that are important, but it is unlikely that they are true innovation when you're doing that. And in a period of such rapid technological development, where we can't fully anticipate the implications of some of these technologies for how they will shape forces, what is our risk tolerance? And how do we know when we've made a bad bet, and how do we recover? You know, Derek, you and I were discussing beforehand, LCS is a program that has not received universal acclaim for its execution. And yet, as you identified, it's a program that still has value to a fleet commander when we think about it. How is it that we evaluate these new technologies, the risk and the applicability of not throwing away previous investments while still ensuring that we're able to put the resources where they're needed to continue the new promising technologies?
Well, I think part of it is building adaptability and upgradability into the programs as you design them and buy them. That has been, if you think about what we've gotten out of the Aegis weapons system over 50 years, that's a great example of that. Although some of those innovations and adaptations have taken a long time. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the integrated combat system will make those upgrades a lot easier in the future because we can do it in smaller pieces of the code. We also need to take advantage of modern technologies that allow us to run something virtually and experiment with it virtually and run simulations with extremely high fidelity and be confident, as confident we can be before we go into the real world, that we are designing something that will add capability and put more capability into the hands of our sailors and Marines. And we have an opportunity to do that with modern technology that really hasn't existed in the past. And we have to embrace that. We also have to think about our investments a little bit differently, right? And so you think about your average, and I'm not sure average applies here, but your average major defense acquisition program, right? I mean, it's a long time, it's lots and lots of money, it's very slow because we don't want to make a bad bet. And we don't want to just lose a lot of money on an investment that doesn't pan out. So how can we think about that differently? And you know, I'm not the authority on this, but the department is changing acquisitions and instituting ways for us to evaluate capabilities rapidly and do things that we are calling bets boards on a technology that looks like it is going to pay off, so we can make a smallish investment with additional outside investment, evaluate what happens, and see whether we want to actually roll that out into a larger scale. I think that initiatives like that will really give us opportunities to move faster and more agilely in the future.
Mr. Hogg, I'm curious your perspective there, because again, yeah, we have never had the resources we felt we needed. And so even as we're making bets on things that are somewhat speculative, we also have urgent, very real requirements for acquiring and maintaining the things that we know are out there right now. How do you balance that?
Well, I think you have to build off the lessons learned from the past. You know, the failure of Vicksburg and Way City and that software failure in the late 90s led to the progress that Ron Boxall and others led with digital twins and all those stuff. The ability to find fast where you're going to fail. You know, run that software change and check at Corona so I can get that back out to the Red Sea quickly. But don't repeat the lessons learned from the past. I think there's also a lesson learned. The knucklehead history major in me comes out. But you know, the way we introduced technology in the 70s, in the early 80s, we used the Norton Sound. Had a dedicated test platform for whether we're putting spy radar, Mark 41, other pieces of technology. When we bankroll everything into the introduction of a new platform, much like we did with Ford and we've seen with other failures, we have to build off of that as we work forward. So part of the pieces within the C notes is to get everybody rebased into that one look, you know, with both the fleet, the Foundry, and other pieces, is when we look towards the progress that can be made, whether it's where we're looking at these curves, as Admiral Kilby talked about this morning, those will allow us to then adapt quickly to do that and see where I make where the consequential changes. A couple of, picking an aviation example, 6 years ago when Secretary of Defense Mattis challenged the Navy and the Air Force to get to 80% mission capable readiness of our strike fighters, the work that we did with CNA and others and BCG and some other contractors, we looked at 14 different variables. Where the one that was most consequential, how to make the changes and learn from outside the Navy lifelines in order to bring in and get those results. And so our readiness of our strike fighters for the last 6 years at an 80% mission capable rate for deployed assets has been achieved because we looked outside our own lifelines. We don't have to just, the MRC card is dated back on how to do a pump from 1945 is probably ripe for change. And so let's look at other ways to do that.
Thanks. Erik, any additional thoughts there?
I think the only thing that I would add is I would echo everything that the other two panelists have said, and the only thing that I would add is, as we think about the types of problems we might face further out in the future, it's important that we recognize we're going to get those. We're never going to guess that right, and so we need to compare to multiple different potential futures and see what that variation looks like, and so we can try and know the types of bets we're making, right? This is going to work better in this scenario, but I'm going to take risk here and not become too focused on just sort of one potential future.
Thanks. I'd like to move now to the payloads pillar of the fleet. And I think it would be difficult to overstate the extraordinary work done by ships and crews of the shore establishment to support ongoing operations in the Red Sea. I think they have demonstrated conclusively that we have highly capable systems, that they are operated by dedicated and highly capable and proficient sailors, and that they have excelled in what is probably one of, if not the most challenging radar environment in the world in defending billions of dollars of commerce and national assets against a variety of threats. And that, while the individual threats are sometimes dismissed as being moderately or low capability, the combination of threats has presented a particularly stressing profile, because there was a time when I could dismiss something that was above a particular altitude and speed as a zoomer and not a concern, and then I became concerned with ballistic missiles. And then I thought, well, I can dismiss something that's below a certain altitude and speed as not a concern, and now I'm concerned with drones. And I'm facing those threats in concert in the Red Sea in ways that fully stress the crew and the system and the capabilities. But what that has also shown us is that we have expended a lot of very expensive interceptors against a lot of low-cost weapons. And that poses a substantial challenge for us economically, and it poses a substantial challenge for us programmatically of how it is in an environment where the adversary is going to have deeper magazines than the ones we've seen so far. The radar environment is likely to be a little less challenging, but holy cats, are we going to see some really capable systems and lots of them coming our way. And I'm curious about the lessons that we're deriving from that. Derek, do you want to take that first?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, the sailors and the systems, produced by our industry partners and installed and built by government professionals and industry partners have performed magnificently. But you're right, at a certain point, we all recognize that we're on the wrong side of what people will call a cost curve as far as the threat that's incoming and the expense I use to defeat that threat. And so we need to look at adding additional capability to our ships. And what I'd like to get to is an infinite magazine where I can use directed energy for defense. That will give me several advantages. One, it allows me to dedicate more space in a physical missile launcher to offense, and I'm interested in that. But it also allows me to, as long as the ship can generate electrical power, defend itself. And I think that that's that's a goal to which we need to continue striving. All that said, we have to think beyond the individual ship as well. There are additional capabilities that go beyond the lifelines of that ship that can contribute to the failure of the attack, contribute to defeating that attack. And that goes out to the Surface Action Group, the Strike Group, the Maritime Operations Center, and all of the activities that go from the fleet commander down to ensure that an attack on our ships does not succeed. And then, back to my job as the Director of Surface Warfare, I need to make sure that the captain and the crew of that ship understand that all of those capabilities are coming together to defend them. Because if I have an interceptor that someone like me is telling that captain not to use because you don't need to use it, trust me, the beeps and squeaks will defend you, I need a way to show them that a soft kill system is going to work. because I can't put that captain and that crew in a position of saving the interceptor, but not actually defending themselves. And so this is the integration of hard kill and soft kill that we need to continue with.
Yeah, and that's a really critical cultural piece as well, because I think there are threats right now against which soft kill systems have at least as high a capability as hard kill systems, and yet our predisposition is that's coming at me, I'm going to shoot at it, and when I do that, I may decrease the effectiveness of the soft kill system.
Right. You need to be able to see that your defense has worked, whether it's hard kill or soft kill. You want to be able to see that it's worked. And it's sort of like deterrence. It's difficult to see that it's working aside from the fact that nothing bad happened. I think I owe sailors a way to see that that soft kill system is working.
Absolutely. Mr. Hogg, I'm really curious because this is an area in particular where integration across capabilities and portfolios is critical to it. How do you see the future of that?
Well, one of the key things is that it's not one battle group that was there in the Red Sea, multiple battle groups. And so building off the lessons learned. Then, as Admiral Kilby talked about this morning, the importance of the COM2X, the putting in of that second and third fleet and two different folks running people through the gauntlet to get them prepared, but building off of that and doing it that way. When the fleet comes in and we build the budget, and they give us their integrated priority list, or higher on that list than an individual platform is the live virtual constructor. There are certain pieces within the Red Sea environment I can't go practice anyplace else. But if I can create realistic scenarios and run it without energizing the systems or showing our hand ahead of time in a challenging capstone type event for that battle group, it's key to bringing ourselves going forward. So the training of the sailors requires both the hardware and the systems and the network to be able to do that. So bringing those pieces in. So we make the hard trades when it comes to, do I slow down the pace of and buy at minimum sustainment rate on some of our platform pieces in order to provide the right level of support for those other pieces coming forward. And that technology in there, LVC is absolutely the top piece that comes in there.
And Erik, I'm going to invite you to be a little ray of sunshine here with some of the work that you've done about the evolution of sensors and seekers versus the evolution of defensive capabilities there.
I will do my best to make this sunny. We've, as you all know, we've witnessed something really incredible in the Red Sea over the past couple of years where a non-state actor has, at least against commercial shipping, imposed a sea denial regime effectively without going to sea. And I think that this, as we look into the future, is a harbinger of the problem that we will face. And that when we face this challenge against adversaries with great power resources, that it's going to become all the more difficult. And I think in particular that there are three areas in technological change that are going to make this a challenging issue. So the first is small satellites and proliferated satellite constellations, which I think is going to make the space layer much more resilient than it is now and has been in the past. There are cube satellites in orbit today that can take an electro-optical image with 5-meter resolution. There are hundreds of them. The company that has put them up, Planet, says that it images the whole globe every day, though there's a little cheat there. They image all of the land mass of the globe every day, which matters a lot for us. The second is miniaturization, allowing for co-location of multimodal sensors. This applies both to that targeting from the space layer as well as to missile seekers. And I think that it will become increasingly difficult to decoy both those sensors and missiles when the sensors can communicate from different angles, and when you can compare an electro-optical and an IR and multiple radar bands and an ESM all at the same time. And so you'll have to decoy almost all of those simultaneously. It's going to make it really hard to hide. And then the third factor is what's likely to be the increasing range of land-based, as well as potentially sea-based anti-ship weapons. There is a decreasing marginal cost to range, generally, so every extra mile you want to add to a missile is cheaper than the mile you added beforehand. And so when we look 20 years out, I fully expect that in a fight in the Pacific, we are going to have to be worrying about enemy missiles at the pier in San Diego. And that is a radically different way of needing to think about how we're going to fight this fight. And if we get directed energy right, then this totally changes the narrative, right? But there are lots of ways. I think we can't make one bet about how we're going to solve that problem. We need to look at multiple different options to try and shift that balance, as well as reconsider the way we think about naval warfare in the long term.
Thanks, and I'd like to pick up on that point of range, because on the offensive side, for 35 years or so, we've enjoyed, if not uncontested, at least not seriously contested sea control. And so we've been able to concentrate our offensive weapons on precision, discrimination, and extraordinary capabilities without worrying as much about range and survivability. And now, as our adversaries are increasingly developing the capability to hold us at distance within an acceptable risk, the need to increase range and survivability on our offensive weapons seems apparent. And Mr. Hogg, I'd start with you on that one, about how it is that we're addressing that across the Navy on a payloads perspective of increasing the length of our ability to reach out.
It's a key part is how we work into the network and network our sensors, you know, and be able to have, you know, in the Cold War, the 4 whiskey grid, how to operate. Now you're taking that, expanding that fourfold, but how to have them connected and work that way. Whether it's a 4th Fleet where I'm linking sail drones to, you know, to the carrier and where that information is, and not having to reinvent the wheel on a daily basis. The other week there, I was out on vacation in the middle of Grand Canyon National Park, and there's an RV, and he's got a Starlink antenna up and watching, you know, Monday Night Football, you know, live stream off of that. We have to think that I'm going to be able to get that level of situational awareness and picture on everybody within the battle group and how that sequences. So I have to ensure that the key part of that investment, whether it's the 2.6 side or the intelligence side, is fully integrated into my picture and work it in there. But we also got to look at it, especially as I see a couple of former N81 alums in the crowd, how I integrate that in the test in the environment that looks at my total force, my joint force, and understand their pieces, their contribution.
Erik, any thoughts there on the offensive side?
I mean, I think being able to lengthen the range of our offensive weapons is going to be critical to our future success. Range is, in effect, a form of maneuver, not just a form of fires. And the longer the range those weapons can have, the easier that will be. And I think as we think about force design and fleet design, there's a little bit of a back to the futures. It's when 100 years ago when we were designing a battleship, we figured out what the metallurgy could support for the caliber of the naval gun we could put on it, and then we designed a ship around that gun. And I think we, again, need to think about what is the capabilities of the weapons we need, what is that, how do we fit that in a form factor, and then how does that then shape the design of the ships that we're building to carry those weapons?
It's an interesting question. I think that goes well to you, Derek, because certainly the Mark 41 VLS has brought a lot of capability and a lot of flexibility, but that form factor also has been influential in determining the range of the systems that we have. How are you looking at that for future requirements?
So we are working on longer range systems. There's a conventional prompt strike capability that'll be coming to the Zumwalt class destroyer. And so that will give us a longer range. That does in fact require a larger launcher. And so we are, to all intents and purposes, rebuilding the ship around that. So back to Erik's point. We have been saying any sensor, any shooter for years and years, and we are going to achieve that. And as Mr. Hogg said, the networking allows us to use our best sensors and our best weapons together, untethered from what platform happens to carry them. And that will give us and give our fleet commanders the range and the offensive capability that we need. We also have to remind ourselves that, I mean, all of us are in a WES right now, right? We are in some kind of weapons engagement zone right this minute here in Northern Virginia. And so warfare incorporates maneuver into and out of your enemy's weapons engagement zone to achieve certain effects. And so we can't just run away from a threat. We have to find ways through our offensive capability, our masking and screening capability, to operate inside WESs when it is appropriate for our forces to do so. And so, yes, we absolutely owe our fleet commanders and our operational commanders longer range fires, but we also owe them capabilities that allow them to use them when it makes the most sense.
I'd like to shift briefly to the third pillar of people. And it strikes me that a sailor who enters boot camp today or an officer who graduates OCS today is going to be retirement eligible in 2045. And the skill sets that were required of a sailor or an officer in 2005, or Derek, when you and I graduated in 1992, have evolved since then. And now we're looking at technologies that incorporate uncrewed systems and other sorts of things. So as we take a look at the people pillar of our fleet, how do we balance the skills, the workforce development, the types of personnel that are going to be required, and is that going to require shifts and changes in what we have considered to be the attributes and the skills of our sailors and officers? And I'll start with you again, Derek.
I mean, the answer is absolutely, but I think it has ever been thus, right? What we have required of a naval officer or a sailor has changed over the years, and I no longer have to do spherical trigonometry in my head or know how to rig a three-masted vessel to maneuver with the wind in a certain way. And one of the most important things is for officers of a certain age to recognize and be explicit about the fact that they will and must learn from their juniors, right? The younger generations of our officers and our sailors have a lot to teach me, for instance. And so it is very important for us to learn from our younger and digital native officers and sailors. We do have to adapt how we train and educate our sailors. We are doing that, and so we have robotics and autonomous systems specialists in the Navy. I was at the Naval Academy last week, and I was speaking with midshipmen who are majoring in robotics and autonomous systems engineering. And the fact that they will come into the fleet as commissioned officers with that education, whether they are writing code for USVs or not, they will understand it in a way that I do not. And that will give us an advantage, and that will allow them to lead sailors with that education and those skills better than I would be innately able to do. And so I'm excited about the changes we're making, but we are and must continue changing the skills that we require of our sailors and officers. We have proven over and over and over again our ability to make those changes.
Erik, any thoughts?
I agree with everything. I think those skill sets have always been changing. I think the thing that I would add is if there's one point of consensus in the academic literature on military innovation, the winning side is not the folks who invent the new technology first, it's the folks who figure out how to use it in a novel way first. And we're not going to know exactly what the new skill sets our sailors need is until we actually get this stuff in the hands of folks in the fleet so that they can play around with it and figure out how we use it and what those skill sets are.
Makes a lot of sense. Sir?
So the core principles of qualification of a naval officer of John Paul Jones that we all had to memorize years ago is still, none of that in that statement attributed to him has anything to do with technology. It's about leadership. It's about understanding you as a warfighter, and that's the key piece going forward. It's important. I remember going to the War College and taking an elective course on programming because I just needed to know. I wasn't going to program. I need to know what my JOs were capable of doing for me and how to work it. And that's, we continue to build and not exploit, but allow them to excel by understanding what they're capable of. Let them float to the path of our direction, not their path of least resistance. So we have to ensure that the one other thing, I had a bike accident a couple of months ago and I broke my thumb, and I was one-handed when it came to texting. And, I was slow to begin with, but now I was really slow. But, we have to make sure that we have everything ready for the thumbs of the millennials and our other sailors, so to protect their skill sets.
That makes sense. So another aspect that is covered both in the CNOTE as well as in the Admiral Caudle's initial directive is the role of allies and partners. And Winston Churchill is supposed to have said that the only thing worse than fighting with allies is fighting without them. I spent my career feeling constrained in the resources that I had as a surface warfare officer, and then I would talk to colleagues from partner navies who were enormously envious of the resources that I had as a surface warfare officer. And so we have the reality that the US defense budget is able to devote resources that oftentimes our allies and partners cannot. And so as we develop this fleet design, as we think about our future fleet, how do we prioritize this interoperability question? Are there areas of capability that allies and partners have better capability on than we do? For example, during the Cold War, mine countermeasures was a mission that we often devolved to the Baltic NATO partners because they had the capability, the incentive, and the force structure to do that at a higher level than the United States did. Are there similar sorts of issues there? How do we take a look at this question of shaping our fleet in a way where we will operate alongside allies and partners, not only members of long-standing alliances like NATO, but also with partners of opportunity depending on the security environment we find ourselves in? Erik, I'll start with you on that one.
Okay. I think this is an essential question as we think about future fleet design. And here I do think, just as I said on the modernization question, that there's some good news. Because if, again, some of our ideas about future fleet design involve smaller, more modular systems or systems of systems that create capability, then that smaller modular ability means that countries that have smaller defense budgets may be able to purchase some portion of those systems and make them work. And in ways that could be, in some circumstances, even more useful for them to have than for us. I also think, and this was alluded to on the previous panel, we need to shift our view on the sources of technology. We tend to think that the best technology comes from the United States, which is very often true, but often our allies and partners in particular areas have technological innovations where they are ahead of us. And to think about our technological sharing not just as a one-way transfer, but rather as an exchange.
Mr. Hogg.
So I don't think it was any mistake for the CNO's first overseas trip involved a trip to Korea and Japan and to look at those things, their tools. But also go back historically and look at how we have exploited other people's technology and used it. Airborne sonobuoys, the radar on a surface ship, angle deck carrier, hydraulic shifting to steam catapults. Those were not U.S. ideas. They were foreign ideas that we then took and exploited and made into the capabilities that we have today. Allies and partners are going to be key to us, both from an industrial standpoint and our quest to get to a larger fleet. The administration and prior administrations' quest to get to a larger fleet is only going to happen with utilizing those allies and partners, whether it's for ship repair, ship maintenance, or ship construction. And so some of our limitations on Buy American, things like that, are obviously things that are going to have to change as we get to beat that going forward. But it's also the intellectual advantage that we need to take. Because not invented here should not be a limit on how we're going to move forward to handle our threat and where we go forward.
Derek.
We have some exceptional systems that are co-produced, ESSM, RAM, SM3, Block 2A, and we benefit from those relationships and the relationships that led to the production, but also the relationships that are strengthened by that co-production, and I think that we should celebrate that every chance we get. A funny thing happens when you are the partner of choice is that your partners start partnering with each other as well, and so as the ESG commander in the Western Pacific, I would work very, very often with the Japanese and very often with the Philippines. And then the Filipinos invited the Japanese to a bilateral exercise with the United States. They were just there, and they chose to continue calling it a bilateral exercise. But our additional allies were there as well. And so we build that community, and we make it so that our allies want to continue working with us. We continue to have exceptional levels of interest from our allies on our more advanced systems. And so NIPO has a full-time job working through all of those requests to interact with and tend the relationships and move toward both FMS but also co-production. And it's more than just the things, right? Access and basing and overflight is something that I think the Navy wishes away of maybe a little more than we should. We like to say that we don't need permission from anyone to do anything, and more than any other service, that's true, but there are certain limits to it. And so when I got to U.S. Transportation Command, I said, hey, for 31 years I consumed logistics, and now I guess I'm supposed to be a logistician, and for 2 years I was something of a logistician. But what I would tell my folks there was, like, hey, every 5 or 6 years I would sidle up next to an oiler, get a couple 100,000 gallons of gas and wander away, and the oiler went somewhere. I didn't know where they went. I didn't have to care where they went, but they went somewhere, right? And so at a certain point in the Navy's chain of events and chain of command, access and basing and overflight will continue to matter to us. And if it matters to us, then those relationships with allies and partners will never, ever be unimportant.
Thanks. Appreciate this robust discussion we've had up to this point. I think, though, I have a ton of questions that I could ask. It's probably an opportune time to open it up to questions from the audience, and I'll follow Peter's lead and issue the technology and call on people as I see their hands raised. Sir.
Good morning. Thank you. This is very interesting. Marshall Branch, retired Coast Guard. My last job was serving as Admiral Brady's LNO at Fleet Forces. My question is, you brought up leveraging allies and partners to expand that fleet design concept. Up until the time at least 2 of you got your first ensign shoulder awards, the Coast Guard conducted ASW missions. They were outfitted with sonar, they were outfitted with torpedoes. That mission went away when the Cold War went away. We've shown several cases where cross-loading force packages between Coast Guard and Navy are very effective. The counter-narcotics missions down in the Caribbean, and some of the other COM2X engagements, things like that. The Coast Guard just got their OBBB capital reinvestment reconciliation funds that amounted to twice the normal annual appropriations budget for the Coast Guard. It's all intended for capital reinvestment. So my question is, has there been much look at that force design? Is it going to be integrating into the Navy's force design concept, particularly as we approach 2027, to take some of those missions that maybe are non-kinetic or partially kinetic to relieve gray hulls so that they can focus on fires and we can take some of those other missions?
Open up to any of the panelists here who would like to take that on.
I think a lot is going to happen of what's happened in the Gulf of America just now, as and those kind of world events will lead us down a path of how we evolve and how with our assets that are pulled in to support both West Pacific and Gulf of America operations, and they're going to help dictate our path.
I think with Homeland Defense as our #1 mission, which shouldn't need to be said, but it's important for us to say that. The close coordination between Navy and Coast Guard and National Fleet will continue. The specifics of sharing are a strategy and policy discussion across the 2 services, but I mean, I do handle the Navy type Navy-owned material on board the cutters, and so at what point do we have to say what additional capability could we either add to or flow back into the cutters? And I think it's a timely discussion.
I think the only thing I can say is when we look at future fleet work at the War College, we try to nest that within what's happening across all the services as we do that. I will be the first to say we could probably do a better job accounting for what's happening across all of our joint service partners as we think about that, but it's something that we try to do.
Edelman.
So the DDG 1000's got 78 megawatts of power available on board. Because it's an integrated power system, it can take advantage of the 78 megawatts of power. The DDG 51 has potential for over 100 megawatts of power. Is there any thought being given to potentially transitioning that ship to an electric ship with an integrated power distribution system to take advantage of all that power for the weapons of the future and potentially lasers, those types of things? If we're going to keep building them, I mean, as long as we're going to keep building them.
Yeah, So we're not talking about the wholesale change out of the propulsion and engineering plant to the Arleigh class. What we're looking at is the next destroyer after that, which we do expect to have integrated power.
Man,
Victoria reporting of NAV staff. Russia-Ukraine war, question to each of you or one of you, whoever wants to take. Lots of lessons learned. What is the most insightful takeaway for you, given what you did from that conflict?
Mr. Hogg, you want to kick us off on that one?
Well, I get cards and letters from Admiral Munch all the time, and I have a monthly phone call with his executive director, just hounding in on some of those things. But it goes back to the question earlier on allies and partners. It's, you know, the key relationships and has been an important part within everything going on in Ukraine and the Black Sea. And working with those partnerships, it's codified why we need to keep that going. And so that's the most important thing I think it's come out of that.
So I think the most important thing is something I already alluded to in a different context in the Red Sea, and that is that the Ukrainians, who do not possess a major navy, have basically forced the third largest navy in the world from the Black Sea without putting any manned vessels to sea, more or less, right? So in the Red Sea, we see this against commercial shipping, and in the Black Sea, we see it against relatively advanced warships.
Yeah, and on that topic, I would commend you, if you haven't had a chance to see it, there's an excellent report by a scholar at CSPA, Dr. Thane Clare, who many of you probably knew as Captain Thane Clare, taking a look specifically at the USV problem in the Russia-Ukraine war and lessons that have been learned and maybe derived from that. Yeah.
I'll just spring off something Erik said earlier. It is, we talk about the innovation, but it's the innovation upon innovation and using the new thing in a new way. So drones and UASs have been around. Watching the Ukrainians adapt them, then watching the Russians adapt to that, and the counter-adaptation following has been inspirational and frightening, and a whole bunch of things.
Applebox.
How you doing? So I'd like to ask the other end of that question. What do we think we learned from Ukraine that we got to be careful that we apply wholly to a whole different theater in the Western Pacific? In other words, what thing do you think we might be overlearning that we would overly apply to a region that's very different?
So I'll take that question to start. It's directly related to the point that I just made, right? Ukrainians have been able to do this in an enclosed sea using technology that won't have the endurance to cross the Pacific. And so I think there's a big difference in that sea denial capability as it exists today in narrow waters versus open waters. But I think that is like, as we look over longer time horizons, right, that's likely to shift, right? So when I talk about the point I made earlier about the advantage sea denial will have, I think that's a decade or two in the future, right? That sort of advantage for shore-based sea denial exists today in narrow waters, but it doesn't necessarily exist in the same way in open waters, and we shouldn't take that lesson today from Ukraine to apply to open waters today.
Any other thoughts there?
Yeah, I think there's a potential negative overlearning there in that we decide that we just can't go somewhere, and it is what I heard Admiral Grady refer to as a culture of quit, and we can't buy into that. We are going to have to operate inside weapons engagement zones, and we just need to learn these lessons and ensure that our lesson is not, well, I can't go there. And so a lot of effort goes into that.
I think you also get the innovation and the tactics that comes into play. Not so much in the Red Sea, we've got air-to-air engagements from helicopters that we never had before. We've had multiple number of drone, and so you adapt and you change your tactics. There's can I put an overlay and lay that into the Caribbean or into the Red Sea or the South China Sea or some other country's straits and see applicability there.
And I'm going to take a quick moderator's privilege and just add to that I think one of the things that I've taken from it is that we do assessment prior to conflict for a reason. and we do our best to have a realistic understanding of the comparative capabilities of forces. We have to make informed choices based on those assessments, but we need to have some humility about those assessments because very rarely do they turn out to actually materialize exactly the way we anticipated. And so we found in the Black Sea a far more capable, adaptive, and innovative Ukrainian force than we accredited, and a less capable Russian force than we accredited. And we certainly can't go into a conflict in the Indo-Pacific banking on the idea that the PLAN will be less effective than they appear on paper, but we need to be prepared for the idea that our assessments are likely to not reflect the early results and that we need to be ready to adapt to them as that comes up. John, you had your hand up and then we'll go to Peter.
Hey, thank you. John Esposito with Lockheed Martin. Hey, first of all, this is a really rich panel. I mean, really, really rich. Thank you for showing up today. And Daryl, I think you're doing a wonderful job as the moderator. I really mean that. Admiral Trinque's comment about Homeland Defense, and then Daryl, your comment about the ensigns today will be on active duty in 2045, had me thinking about trends today that are going to impact those ensigns. And in particular, one emerging trend is Golden Dome for America. Is the Navy late to the game, ahead of the game? Where are we? And I'd just be curious to see your individual opinions on Golden Dome for America. Thank you.
So I think the aspiration of Golden Dome will stretch all of us and force all of us to reach beyond what we were already planning. I don't believe Navy is late to the game. I think that when you think about ballistic missile defense capability that adapts into hypersonic defense capability, the Navy has some of the best stuff out there. Now, defending such a wide area against such a wide array of threats will continue to pose a challenge. But it's also an opportunity, right? As a requirements sponsor, I look at what General Gutlein and his team will have to do and will have to ask from all of their teammates, and I think, oh, there's going to be goodness for me here, right? And so the innovations that come out of that will in some form flow into our surface ships and give us additional capability, and potentially into our submarines and aircraft as well. And so I don't believe that we're behind. I think that it is absolutely a big, hairy, audacious goal, and we've been told to go do it, so we'll do it. But I think the Navy is not at all behind.
So, there's a fourth part of I talked about three things that I think are going to make CDNIL have a long-range advantage in the future. There's a fourth part of that, which is the tactical offensive advantage of the missile that I think we've known about for a long time. And as I think about that argument, just as we talked about directed energy, there are some technological things that could really shift those trends, right? And a highly successful Golden Dome for America that changes the narrative on missile defense would totally upset the things that I talk about. But as I think we've alluded, there are a lot of technical challenges that need to be overcome, right? I am hopeful that we will do it, but I'm not convinced we should bank on it, everything that we should be able, that it will be successful in doing that.
We also have to see how it evolves. You take Iron Dome, you take Aegis Ashore, take some of those pieces that we have, and then how this is going to morph and work into the other piece.
Yeah, and I think in particular, the question of spectrum management is going to become really important because the idea of coverage over the area that is contemplated using RF detection poses significant challenges to civilian employment of spectrum, and the idea that you'd be able to throw a bag of microwave popcorn in the air and have it come down cooked for you is probably not the environment that we want to live in there. So what directions that's going to push us in technologically and operationally, I think are likely to have implications for how it is that we'll perform that mission in the fleet. Peter, you there?
I'd like to try to link the first panel to this panel using the Ukraine-Russia war as a bridge. So you alluded to the adaptation of Ukrainians to changing battle space. How confident are we that whatever war takes place in the Indo-Pacific, if it does, we will adapt fast enough to conditions given the nature of our naval and industrial bases? Where I'm coming from is horrifying passages in Bob Gates' book about his time as secretary about his efforts to get MRAPs to the troops. People are dying from IUDs, and we cannot prod the procurement and acquisition bureaucracies and defense manufacturers to produce systems to counter AIDs. It takes them months and months and months, if not years. Can we do that adaptation that will help the fleet using our national industrial base in a timely fashion?
I'm a glass half full on this part. A case in point, Andrew and CCA from latest CCA from start of design to first flight 18 months. You know, first flight from the F-35 from when the contract was awarded was measured in decades, not measured in months. You know, the adaptability that we've had, you know, from a crisis. You know, Ron Boxall at Penn State made, only way he graduated was because there were deadlines, because he, you know, there was procrastination all the time.
This is not attributable, right?
Yeah. But it's a, you know, a deadline, a crisis creates the innovation, creates the motivation to get to that. Now, not everybody's picked up the gauntlet yet on the direction towards, you know, industrial base and how to get that. But those are the kind of things. So I'm positive, based upon the past, that we'll find a way.
I think the only other thing I would add to that, Peter, is that in the conflicts that we faced in the Middle East over the last 20 years, the existential security of the United States was not at risk. And I think that it is likely in a conflict in the Pacific that that would be the case. And that shifts the incentives of the system. Now, that doesn't mean that if you start from 0, you're going to get to 100 quickly, but I do think that that's a fundamental difference in that comparison.
Sir?
Yes, Rick Easton, retired SWO. Like to just ask a question about the people part. First of all, that's the center of the CNO strategy. It's also the last piece of the platform, payloads and people. I was just recently, earlier this week, down in Orlando in the Modeling Simulation Training Conference, and Admiral Goucher was saying, hey, in the Submarine Force, we've actually started basically a train to qualify for the individuals and train to certify, something that we went down that lane with LCS at this point 2 decades ago when we were challenged by then CNO Clark to put together the first hybrid sailors to man those ships. So my question is as we look at that piece that's so central, what revolutionary initiatives? Are we taking a look at seashore rotation, more time at sea for these perishable skills? Arleigh Burke's have 20 missions. When I commissioned Arleigh Burke, there was 9 missions on the ship. It's obviously much more complicated combat system, so a lot of things there all come to confluence. Obviously the Whitties were a great thing, but what are we doing from a personnel perspective comprehensively to really try and get that team to turn inside the enemy's turning circle?
I think the investments we've made in training would please you. The way that, just to stick with my community, the Surface Warfare Schools Command and Surface Combat Systems Training Commands have updated and continue to update their curricula, I think would make any of us proud. And if you have in your head the idea that it takes months and months and maybe over a year to get Navy Education and Training Command to deign to allow the update to a curriculum, I will tell you that it's just not that way anymore. We are updating our curricula much more quickly. We're also incorporating training, and we referred to it a bit earlier, Mr. Hogg did, in live virtual and constructed training so that we can train on realistic environments. And so we went from everything being on the job a long, long time ago to inserting some computer-based training a few decades ago. That computer-based training was necessarily very high level, and we couldn't show realistic environments because the computing systems couldn't handle that. We couldn't show realistic threats because maybe the security system in the computer wouldn't really allow it. Now I can put an Aegis Fire Controlman in front of a virtual spy radar display and show them the actual environment, what they'll see in an actual environment in the Red Sea or the Gulf of Aden, and make sure they have that experience before they ever really get there. And so those are just examples at the individual level, but also you can expand that out to the entire watch team, the entire ship, the entire strike group, and that's the kind of training that we're doing right now. We also have computing capability inside of our systems that allow for the operation of large language models just happen to have that compute power. And so we can use virtual operations and virtual maintenance trainers to give our sailors better experience earlier on before a system breaks, or you can, if you're struggling with how to set up the spyware and radar, for instance, you can ask SpyGPT, I kid you not, in this environment, how do I want to set you up so that I can maximize my capability against threats A, B, and C? And the computer will tell you that, and then they run it, and it works. And so that kind of decently quick adaptation is, I think, a benefit. We also succeed by success, and by understanding that innovation works, we'll be more inclined to innovate in the future.
You can see also, it's not just within the SWO world, aviation. You know, my generation, attack air folks, they went to the boat on T2s, then they went to the boat on TA4s, and they had to get that before they got their wings. We're not taking the people to the boat until you get to the FRS post-wings now. Different priority changing of where the emphasis has to be within that training cycle. You know, the sonar equation, recognition differential, if I've got AI tools and other skill sets in there that can make that easier, so I don't have to spend as much time on that because he's got another tool to be able to use that can speed my time of training, and it can also raise all boats to a higher level, you know, across the board. So there's a technology to be able to take advantage of it, but if we don't adapt our training, we just get stuck in the roadway. Well, that's always been the way we've done it. SWOs, you know, that's your moniker, right? So that's how we get it going forward. I'm picking on Boxall again, as opposed to.
I told you I'd pay you back soon.
Sir?
So I'm going to put on my former director for operational test and evaluation hat. We've talked a lot about affordable surface firepower and gravitated toward directed energy. I'll tell you, it's a fair weather friend. So what other things are we looking at for anti-cruise missiles that are cheap and easy to put together that don't involve a standard missile tube, in terms of affordable surface firepower that would work in rain and snow and all the other things that surface ships find themselves in?
I'm not sure everyone could hear that, though. The question was about affordable alternatives for anti-missile defense, something that's cheaper than an SM.
And doesn't involve direct
And doesn't rely on directed energy.
So we've been successful in adding counter UAS capability to deploying destroyers recently by involving some smaller defense firms and smaller technology firms. So lower cost interceptors added to our deploying DDGs. We're also working on the hypervelocity projectile. We've worked on that for a while, since the railgun project. But come to find out, we don't actually need a railgun to use that. What we need are good optics. Back to your weather, the weather part of the question. But again, I need to give options to that commanding officer so that they have more and more and more things that can help them defend their ship. I also want to continue to look farther to the left in the F2, T2, et cetera, equation, so that I am making my ships harder to find and harder to track.
I say that's when we look further out for force design, those are exactly the sorts of things we try and open the aperture to consider. Can I make it? Can I build ships that can hide, right? Whether that's because they're low observable or because they're harder to pick out from the traffic that's around there. We build ships that are really good at taking hits and surviving, but that can be more vulnerable to mission kills. Can we build ships in a way that they're less vulnerable to a mission kill so that they'll take a hit and they'll continue to survive, right? I think there are broader ways than just missile defense to try and get after that protection problem.
I have to get comfortable in getting our leadership to not want a multi-mission for everything. You know, if I have single task assets within the battle group that can distribute my efforts, make a difference. But everybody wants to be a lesson, everybody wants some other piece. So that's a challenge.
So I really appreciate the rich questions from the audience. We have about 3 minutes remaining, and we're the last thing between you and lunch. What I would ask each of our panelists to do is to take a minute and to talk about what it is we haven't discussed yet that you think is critical to the future of the fleet.
Well, I'll kick it off. One of the things that the last panel talked about, Tom Moore made a comment about the reforms and changing what we do with acquisition. Bipartisan PPBE commission made 28 recommendations. That's going to help everybody within how to get to those things. But you have to think and operate differently in order to be able to move at pace.
I think to zoom out to a very strategic perspective on what navies are for, fundamentally we need to be able to ensure that non-naval and non-military traffic can cross oceans to get to where it needs to be to keep our allies in the fight during a war and their economies in the fight. And I'm not sure when we consider fleet design, we think about that as core to the problem that we need to solve.
I think we should view change in a positive way whenever we can. And so as we look at acquisition reform, as we look at a new organization inside the department like the Defense Autonomy Working Group, we should not look at that and think, oh, I'm losing my USVs to the dog. That's not what's going on. This is someone who has been given a specialized mission to determine our tactics and techniques and procedures and acquisition strategies that will benefit the entire Department of War. And so we really have to be comfortable sharing or giving up control in some of these processes and recognizing that we'll still get a lot of good out of it. As we go through reorganizations and new ideas, I remind all of my folks in N96, the CNO and our Navy and our nation will still need people who care about and are driving requirements for the surface force. And if the conversations, our conversational partners change because of some reorganizations, we shouldn't care about that. We still have that end goal in mind.
Well, thank you all very much. This panel exceeded my already high expectations for what we get from it. Thank you to the audience for a great, challenging, and interesting set of questions. And if you can join me in thanking our panelists.
Fantastic job by the panelists. Doyle, excellent preparation. I mean, those are some really good questions, really good meetings. And I want to thank Dr. Hodges and the panelists with one of our highly sought after coins from the Center for Maritime